This is the Gemara in Brachot daf Amud Bet. The Gemara starts off, Amar Mar. Amar Mar, our master has taught, we've learned previously, referring to the Braita, Korei Kriyat Shema Umitpalel. One should recite Shema and then daven, and then say Tefillah, say Shmona Esrei. This is the previous Braita which described the order of one's evening, where a person should come home and first say Shema and then Tefillah. The Gemara now observes about this statement, Misayeya Leila Rabbi Yochanan. This Braita supports the assertion of the Amora Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said, Eizehu ben ha'olam haba, who is a person who is of olam haba, a person headed for olam haba, Zeh somech geula letefillah shel arvit. This is a person who says the geula before the Shemona Esrei of Arvit, who says the end of Shema, which discusses the redemption Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the bracha afterwards, Emet V'Amuna, which culminates with Gal Yisrael. This whole section of geula needs to be right before Shemona Esrei of Ma'ariv. As opposed to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the other Amora who disputes Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omer, Tefillot be'emtza tiknu. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that Tefillot, the Shemona Esreis, should be in the middle. What does that mean in the middle? Rashi explains, Bein shnei kriyat shema tiknu kol Tefillot shel yom. In between the two kriyat shmas, they established all the Tefillot of the day. All the Shemona Esreis come after the morning Shema and before the night Shema. The Kasavar, so clearly Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi thinks Tfilat Arvit Kodemet LeKriyat Shema. The Shemona Esrei of Ma'ariv comes before Shema. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi thinks that the Tefillot come in the middle of the Shema. It's like the Shema is sandwiched the day. The morning Shema and the night Shema of Ma'ariv, then the three Shemona Esreis come in between. So clearly Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi thinks that we don't do Smichat Geula Letefillah at night. We don't introduce Shemona Esrei at Ma'ariv with Shema, but rather Shemona Esrei, we don't introduce Shemona Esrei with Shema, but rather we say Shema after Shemona Esrei. We don't do Smichat Geula Letefillah. This is a machloket amarayim between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and the Braita, which says Korei Kriyat Shema, which Palel in that order supports the view of Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara continues to explain this machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. But my kamiflagi, what's the machloket? What's the point of contention? Why do they argue with each other? Ibait ema kra, ibait ema svara. If you want, I can explain it based on a dispute about how to interpret psukim. Alternatively, if you want, I can explain it independent of any psukim, that they each saw it in a different way logically. And the Gemara will now explain. Ibait ema svara. Here I'll explain to you how they can argue logically. To Rabbi Yochanan Savar, Geula me'orta nami havi. Rabbi Yochanan thinks that the redemption me'orta at night, nami havi, also was an important redemption. Ela geula me'alyata lo havya ela ad safra. But the main redemption was in the morning. Rabbi Yochanan does acknowledge that the main redemption occurred in the morning. That's when the Jewish people actually left Mitzrayim. But the night was also an important piece of redemption, because at night, following Makkah Bechorot, in the middle of the night, Paro gave us permission or told us to leave Mitzrayim. So the redemption actually occurred at night also. And therefore, the night redemption is important and therefore requires Smichat Geula Letefillah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Savar, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's logic is Kevan de lo havya ela mitzafra lo havya geula me'alyata. Since the redemption actually occurred in the morning, during the daytime, lo havya geula me'alyata, it wasn't really important enough to be considered, and there's no need for Smichat Geula Letefillah at night. And therefore, may as well say Shema after Shemona Esrei. That's one way of explaining the machloket. They argue about whether the redemption at night was a significant redemption. The second possibility, v'ibayin ein makra, that they argue about how to interpret a pasuk. Ushneim mikra echad darshu, and they're both interpreting one same pasuk. Dichtiv b'shach b'chol v'kumecha. It's based on an interpretation of the pasuk b'shach b'chol v'kumecha, which is always associated with Kriyat Shema. The Rabbi Yochanan Savar, Makish Shchiva Lakima. Rabbi Yochanan thinks we make a hekesh. A hekesh is a connection between two things written together in the Torah. B'shach b'chol v'kumecha. These two are connected. We connect the night Shema to the morning Shema. Ma kima, just like in the morning, Kriyat Shema v'achar kach tefillah, the order is Shema and then tefillah. Av shchiva nami, so to at night, Kriyat Shema v'achar kach tefillah. It should be Shema and then Shemona Esrei. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan says, I agree that the main redemption, the main requirement for Smichat Geula Letefillah should be in the morning, based on logic, but the pasuk carries it over to the night also. Rabbi Yeshua Levi Savar, Rabbi Yeshua Levi thinks, Ma ki Shchiva Lakima, he also connects Shchiva Lakima, Ma Kriyat Shema Samach Lemitato, just like in the morning, Shema is closer to when you were in bed. Av Shchiva Nami Kriyat Shema Samach Lemitato. So to at night, the Shema should be closer to when you go to bed. In other words, they both take from the pasuk that we connect the night to the morning. The question is, what quality do we take from the morning and carry over to the night? Rabbi Yochanan says the main thing is Smichat Geula Letefillah, and therefore we do it at night also, even though it's not as intuitive. Rabbi Yeshua Levi thinks that it's important that to fulfill the language of B'shach b'chol v'kumecha, when you get out of bed, when you get into bed, Shema should be closer to bed than the other part of tefillah. So therefore, in the morning, Shema should be first, and in the night, similarly, Shema should be later. So this is the machloket amarayim about whether there's a requirement of Smichat Geula Letefillah at night, and these are the two ways of explaining it, based on the Kra or based on the Svara. Now the Gemara comes and analyzes or challenges. Meitiv Mar Brei D'Ravina. Mar Brei D'Ravina brings a problem, a contradiction from actually the Mishnah. Ba'erev mevarech shtayim lefaneha ushtayim lachareha. The Mishnah, the next Mishnah says that the night Shema gets 2 brachot beforehand and 2 brachot afterwards. V'i amrit ba'i lismoch. And if you say we're required to connect and introduce the tefillah with geula, halo kasamach geula letefillah, we don't do it. The Mishnah says we don't do it. Because the second additional bracha of Brachot Kriyat Shema at night, hashkivenu, interrupts between the geula and the tefillah. So this is the Mishnah proves that there's no requirement for Smichat Geula Letefillah at night. Amrei, they answer, Kevan desakinu rabbanon hashkivenu, since the Chachamim established this bracha of hashkivenu, ki geula arichta damya. It's like an extension of the redemption. It too is part of the redemption because the rabbis established it that way, and some Rishonim explain that it's actually thematically connected. That Hashkivenu is about the fact that not only did God redeem us from Mitzrayim, but He also protected us throughout the years following the redemption. And so too at night, we ask God for His protection at nights. And therefore, Hashkivenu is not an interruption, it doesn't prove anything. Di'ilo teimahachi, if you wouldn't say this, in other words, an additional support for the concept of Geula Richta, Shachrit Hechi Mati Samich. How could you ever do it in Shachrit? And Shachrit, everyone agrees we do Smichat Geula Letefillah. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan himself said, Balayla B'tchila Omer Hashem Tzvatay Tiftach. And Rabbi Yochanan told us, and this is the halacha, that Shemona Esrei is introduced by a pasuk in Tehillim, Hashem Tzvatay Tiftach, God, please open my lips. Ulevasofu Omer Yehiyu Levaton Mefi. And at the end of Tefillah, we add another pasuk. So if we add a pasuk before Shemona Esrei, so that would interrupt the Geula and the Tefillah. Hashem Tzvatay Tiftach interrupts between Gal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei. Ella Hatam Obviously, everyone agrees that there is Smichat Geula Letefillah in the morning, and apparently everyone agrees that the reason that we can say Hashem Tzvatay Tiftach must be that it's an extension of the Tefillah. So Hachanami, so the same thing can carry over. Kevan to Tekina Rabbanan L'Meimar Hashkivenu, since Chachamim established Hashkivenu, Ki Geula Arichta Dami. It also is an extension of the Tefillah, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan is justified in believing that there's a requirement for Smichat Geula Letefillah at night at Ma'ariv.